Hi, this is Ryan, and honestly, if you're looking at that little pull-out pad under your new desk chair right now and thinking about extending it, maybe wait a second. I've spent the last 3 weeks tearing apart 6 of the top-selling ergonomic footrest office chairs on Amazon. The ones hovering right around that $180 to $250 mark, aggressively marketing a 180-degree lay-flat sleep mode. And looking at the underside of the seat pan on this latest one, the physics just flat out don't make sense. You're taking 30, maybe 40 pounds of leg weight and extending it out 18 inches. That turns your legs into a literal crowbar prying against 2 millimeter thin ABS plastic sleeves. You can actually hear the plastic groaning when you lock it into place. People always complain that these footrest chairs get hopelessly wobbly or the leg rest starts sagging by month 6. But it's not because you're too heavy, and it's not a defective gas cylinder. It's a fundamental geometry flaw. Why are 90% of these chairs destined for a landfill before the year is out? And what is the one hidden piece of metal you actually need to look for to prevent it? If you appreciate not wasting your money on disposable furniture, hit subscribe, because we need to look under this seat pan. I dragged 6 of these boxes up my stairs last week. If you've ever ordered flat pack furniture off Amazon, you know the smell I'm talking about, that sharp industrial off-gassing from the foam that hits you the second you cut the tape. I set up the Hbada 3, the Sihoo M18, and a handful of those generic alphabet soup brands that change their seller name every time their reviews drop below 4 stars. And look, I get the appeal. You're working from home, your lower back is screaming by 2 p.m., and you see a listing showing a guy basically asleep at his desk. It looks like a zero-gravity pod. You think, yeah, I want to review spreadsheets like I'm in a dentist chair. But then you actually build.
Let's start with the most obvious hazard before we even talk about the leg mechanism: the wheelbase. Most standard office chairs have a 24 to 26-inch star base. That's perfectly fine when your center of gravity is hovering straight down the middle of the gas cylinder. But when you recline to 150 degrees, which almost all these budget footrest chairs claim they can safely do, and then you throw 30 pounds of leg weight out past the front lip of the seat, you are fundamentally altering the physics of the chair. I tested this with a generic $140 mesh model. I locked it into maximum recline, slid the footrest out, and leaned back. The moment I shifted my weight upward to reach for my coffee on the desk, the front casters actually lifted a 1/4 inch off my hardwood floor. It's terrifying. To safely support a cantilevered load like that without making it a seesaw, you need a heavy 28-inch minimum base. But wider bases cost a fortune to ship, so the budget brands just don't include them. They give you a standard narrow base, slap a 150-degree safe sticker on the listing, and let gravity sort it out. Okay, let me back up a second. The tip-over risk is bad, but it's not why these end up on the curb. The real crime is what happens when you're not using the footrest. I didn't even think about this until I tried to use the Sihoo model for just normal typing. When the footrest is stowed away, it doesn't just vanish into the ether. You have this thick, rigid pad of foam and hard plastic shoved right under the front edge of the seat pan. I'm 5'11". When I pull myself close to my desk to focus, I naturally tuck my feet back a bit toward the wheels, but I couldn't. My calves kept slamming into the stowed footrest. It leaves maybe 1.5 inches of clearance underneath, so I had to sit further back, which meant I was reaching forward for my keyboard, which immediately pulled my shoulders away from the lumbar support.
Actually, wait, that's not the right way to put it. You're not just sacrificing posture. You are actively fighting the chair's physical footprint. You're trading your core 9-to-5 ergonomic support, the entire reason you bought an office chair, for the privilege of a footrest you might use for 20 minutes a day. I haven't tested it long-term yet with someone who's taller, so grain of salt, but I imagine it's a nightmare if you have long legs. And then there's the hardware itself. Flip almost any of these sub-$200 chairs. Upside down, go ahead, check the listing photos if you don't believe me. You will see 2 parallel metal tubes that the footrest slides out on. In a piece of heavy machinery, or even a good drawer, those rails would run through lubricated steel bearings. Here, they run through molded ABS plastic sleeves.
Plastic, holding a metal bar that is acting as a massive lever arm. I took a pair of digital calipers to the mounting plate on a brand new Karate chair. It measured exactly 2.1 millimeters thick. I sat in the chair, extended the footrest, rested my legs on it for just 5 minutes, and then got up and measured the sleeve again. It had already warped by a fraction of a millimeter. It doesn't sound like much, but multiply that by 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. By month 3, that tight factory tolerance is totally gone. The plastic stretches out, the rails start to sag, and suddenly your footrest is angling towards the floor and you're unconsciously tensing your hamstrings just to keep your heels from sliding off. You bought a footrest to relax, and now you're doing an isometric leg workout just to watch YouTube. And that's just the early wear. What happens at month 6 is, honestly, it's why I had to make this video. Because the way the undercarriage actually fails is not just annoying, it's structural. Let me show you what I found when I took the mounting plate off the Hbada chair. There's this concept in engineering called a lever arm. When you sit up straight, your weight pushes directly down into the gas cylinder. It's a clean 90-degree angle. But when you recline to 135 degrees and kick out that footrest, you're not just resting your legs, you're applying a massive asymmetrical torque right to the front edge of the seat pan. I noticed this completely by accident. I was vacuuming the studio on Tuesday and I found these tiny glittering black flakes on the carpet directly underneath the generic $160 mesh chair. At first, I thought it was just cheap paint chipping off the base. It wasn't. It was nylon dust. Okay, let me back up for a second. Inside the recline mechanism of almost every office chair are these teeth that lock the backrest into place. On a premium chair, like a used Herman Miller or a steel case, those teeth are forged steel or aluminum. When they lock, they lock. On these budget footrest chairs, they're almost exclusively hard nylon plastic. When you're fully reclined and your legs are extended on that little pad, every time you shift your weight, every time you laugh, reach for your mouse, or adjust your headset, that plastic gear takes the full brunt of the leverage. Your legs act like a literal crowbar trying to pry the seat pan apart. That dust on my floor was the locking teeth actively grinding themselves away under the stress. I give it maybe 8 months of daily use before that lock just shears off completely. When that happens, the chair turns into a permanent, terrifying seesaw. And here's the part that actually makes me mad. The manufacturers absolutely know this. I spent an hour digging through Amazon reviews for these models, and I applied a pretty aggressive filter. I stripped out the Voina voices, the receive this for a discount fluff, and anyone who reviewed it within the first week. If you look at long-term verified purchases after 1 year, the failure rate isn't random. It's incredibly consistent. It's almost entirely snapped mounting plates and stripped recline gears, but they still boldly print heavy-duty 400-pound capacity right on the first thumbnail. Actually, wait, let's talk about that 400-pound claim because the math doesn't add up at all. The gas cylinder itself might be a class 4. It might technically be rated for 400 pounds if the weight is dropped perfectly straight down its center axis. But the bracket holding the footrest rails, that's a completely different story. I put a torque wrench on the torque wrench bolts holding the footrest bracket to the wooden seat pan of the GTPLAYER chair. The metal is so soft that the threads started to strip at just 15 foot-pounds of pressure. That is basically nothing. If you weigh 200 pounds and you drop your legs down onto that footrest a little bit too fast, you're generating significantly more force than that bracket can safely hold. You're being sold a spec sheet that applies to the isolated components in a vacuum, not the assembled chair in reality. It's like putting a sports car engine in a golf cart and selling it based on the horsepower. Yeah, the engine can handle it, but the chassis is going to rip itself apart the second you hit the gas. And the wildest thing is, this entire failure point only exists because they had to cram the footrest mechanism into the exact same cramped 5-inch square space under the seat as the tilt controls, the recline tensioner, and the gas lift. There's a subtle flex in the seat pan of the Hbada model, right near the right armrest when you lean back with the footrest out. It's slight, but if you press hard against the plastic shroud, you can feel the plywood actually warping around the screws. Honestly, you'd never notice in normal use for the first few weeks, but that flex is a ticking clock. After staring at that warped plywood under the Hbada for 20 minutes, I was honestly ready to write off the entire category. I had 4 of these chairs completely disassembled in my garage, and I was actively dreading wrestling them back into their cardboard boxes for the UPS guy. It's a miserable process. But there is one I'm not returning. I'm keeping it upstairs in the studio. Before I even put the Newtral Magic Age together, my very first physical impression pulling it out of the box was just, wait, the base plate feels like a literal anvil. I fully expected their heavily marketed auto-following lumbar to be a flimsy plastic gimmick that squeaked every time I breathed. And honestly, the back support is incredibly aggressive, almost jarring at first. But what surprised me positively was the footrest execution. When you flip the Newtral over, the undercarriage looks like a heavy-duty car chassis. They use thick tubular steel running through dense, reinforced metal brackets. You can lock it into a deep recline, shift your weight sideways to grab a pen, and the frame doesn't even shudder.
It's not perfect. The base is so heavy that the factory casters practically drag on my medium pile carpet like they're glued down, so you have to swap them for rollerblade wheels immediately. And I haven't tested the long-term wear on that complex lumbar spring yet, so grain of salt there. But the footrest itself, it won't snap. I really wanted the Sihoo M18 to be the mid-range winner. The mesh on the backrest is taut and cooling, totally avoiding that cheap hammock sag you usually get for $200, but then I actually used the footrest for an hour. The foam pad is barely 13 inches wide. If you're not sitting with your knees squeezed perfectly together, your calves just spill over the hard, unpadded plastic edges. It's incredibly distracting. You're trading lower back pain for ankle bruises. Okay, let me back up. I keep saying these chairs fail, but what I really mean is the concept of a cheap attached footrest fails. If you are a standard desk worker, if your day is spreadsheets, clicking, typing, and leaning forward into your monitors, you do not want an attached footrest at all. You're sacrificing your core 9-to-5 pelvic alignment for a feature you'll maybe use twice a week. If it were my $200, I wouldn't touch any of these 2-in-1 hybrids. I would buy a standard, rock-solid ergonomic chair without the leg gimmick, and I would spend $30 on a high-density memory foam teardrop stool off Amazon. I have one sitting under my desk right now. When you press your bare heel into it, it yields just enough to take the pressure off your joints, but the rubberized bottom stops it from sliding away on the hardwood. It is structurally superior in every single way. It doesn't crowd my calves when I shove it aside, it doesn't permanently compromise the center of gravity of my chair, and when I do need to stretch my legs out, it supports my weight from the floor up, rather than using my chair's seat pan as a fulcrum. If you're a heavy console gamer or someone who genuinely leans back with a controller for 3 hours a night, I get the appeal of the built-in rest. I do. But you have to protect yourself from the marketing. Before you click buy on any of these listings, check the wheelbase diameter. If it's not at least 27 inches across, close the tab. If you can't verify from user review photos that the rail housings underneath are actual metal, walk away. Buying a $150 recliner chair isn't a life hack. You're just renting future trash. I'm doing a 6-month follow-up on that heavy-duty Newtral chair to see if the metal gears actually survive daily use. Make sure you're subscribed so you catch that. Let me know what you're sitting on down below. I'm genuinely curious how many of you are fighting those sagging plastic rails right now, or if you already gave up and took a hacksaw to them. See you in the next one.